Hey, what's up? This video is going to be going over Nebraska at Northwestern this Saturday, so let's get into it. Alrighty, this Saturday's game, Nebraska going on the road to face Northwestern, will be kicking off Saturday, 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time. It will be played in Evanston, Illinois. The weather shouldn't be a determining factor in this game. It's supposed to be sunny, 49 degrees, 10-mile-per-hour wind at kickoff. So we've got Scott Frost going on the road to face Pat Fitzgerald. Scott Frost 19-12 as a head coach total, and Pat Fitzgerald 89-68 as a head coach total. The spread has kind of jumped all over the place in this game. I've seen it as high as like 7 or 8 when the spread first came out, and I've seen it kind of go as low as 3. So I'll get into that later towards the end when I'm kind of talking about who to bet on and stuff. But yeah, the spread has been kind of evening out somewhere in that 3 to 5 range on most betting places. And as we dive into the stats here, strength of schedule, Northwestern has played a tough schedule, the 10th hardest in the country. Nebraska's also had a decently tough schedule at 27th toughest in the country. Talent on the field should be slightly favoring Nebraska, 26.2 average recruiting rank last 5 years to Northwestern's 52.6. And then some of the yardage differential numbers. Nebraska has a big advantage in yards per rush at 4.7 to 2.4. Northwestern is very solid against the run, only allowing 4.0 yards per rush. Nebraska allowing 5.2 yards per pass. Nebraska has an almost yard advantage at 7.4 to 6.5. Opponent's yard per pass, Nebraska has a slight edge at 6.9 to 7.4. Diving into the quarterback position, giving Nebraska a B because Adrian Martinez has kind of started to look like he's healthy again and is having less bad decisions every game. It seems like he's still making bad decisions, but they're not as common as they were early in the year. So I'm bumping him up to a B because of the health and getting more experience. The quarterback for Northwestern is Clayton Thorson, and I'm giving him a C+. He was actually a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, so he was kind of a big name recruit for Northwestern to get. But when I dive into his numbers, I see a guy that's kind of plateaued. The last 3 years, his yards per attempt has gone from 6.7 to 6.6 to 6.8. So he kind of is what he is at this point. He hasn't really taken that next step to be a really good quarterback. He's just a decent quarterback. He doesn't take a lot of sacks, though. He doesn't make a lot of boneheaded plays, so I am going to give him at least a C+. But between the fact of him seeming to not have a lot of arm talent, and he's basically a statue. He doesn't run at all. He's got negative rushing yards on the year. Now in college, they do count sacks against the quarterback's rushing total instead of the passing numbers. So, you know, that number can be kind of misleading. I mean, you know, because it's counting sacks, but he is negative on the year, so he's not going to beat you with his legs very often. So I anticipate Nebraska to do pretty well against Clayton Thorson, and he's not a guy that throws for 300 yards very often, so I'm not expecting big things out of Northwestern at the quarterback position. As far as coaching, I'm going to give a slight edge to Nebraska. I think Scott Frost is a very highly touted coach and one of the best young coaches in the country, and has had an undefeated season before at a school like UCF, which is pretty impressive. But I'm going to give Pat Fitzgerald a B because I think he's done a great job at Northwestern. I think they've won more games with Pat Fitzgerald than they would without him. He's got them recruiting very consistently at about 50th best in the country, which is actually pretty good for Northwestern. They've got tough academic standards to recruit around and stuff, so, and they're not a marquee program. So I think 50th in the country is about what they can expect, is about their ceiling for recruiting. Then, as far as intangibles, I'm bumping Nebraska from an F to a D+, because yes, Nebraska had 10 penalties the last game, but I didn't see as many like ridiculous, idiotic penalties, like hitting guys 3 yards out of bounds or jumping on someone who's laying on the ground or roughing the quarterback on 3rd down. I didn't see very many of those. And Nebraska was also much better in the turnover department against Wisconsin, so I see them trending upward in the intangibles department. They also made a change at punter, which I think is going to be good for them because they have not been getting good production on the punting unit at all this year, so that can only get better. So they get a slight bump up to a D+ this week. Northwestern isn't great as far as intangibles are concerned, but they're decent. Their turnover margin is barely negative, but they are very buttoned up in the penalties department. They're one of the best teams in the country as far as penalties per game is concerned. So I'm going to give them a C+ when I kind of looked over it all. Diving into some of the yardage differentials, I think one of the most important stats in football is yards per play differential. And we see Nebraska coming in at a dead even 0.0. They are negative 0.5 in rushing differential and plus 0.5 in pass differential, so they just break even. And then Northwestern is actually negative 1.6 in rush differential, which is really alarming. That's a bad number for a football team to have. And they're also almost a full yard negative in the passing differential. So coming in at a negative 2.5 to Nebraska's neutral 0.0, that's the reason you're seeing a lot of expert bettors throwing money on Nebraska in this game. That's why the spread moved from like 7 or 8 to 3 or 4, because there was a lot of money coming in on Nebraska. And if you try to bet on Nebraska just to win, like if you're just picking the winner, you're going to pay more interest, the juice they call it. You're going to pay more juice to pick Nebraska on this one, because there's a lot of money coming in on Nebraska so far in betting. And it was going to be the first time this year that I was going to say this is the week to bet on Nebraska. This would be my first time saying it this year. But now that the spread's getting closer and closer to a pick 'em, I don't love it as much as I did when the spread was 6.5 or 7. At that point I was saying it's a great bet to bet on Nebraska. But the lower the spread gets, it was 4.5 when I made this graphic for the video. Now I believe it's even trending downwards towards 3. So it's not an amazing bet anymore, but it's still a good bet to bet on Nebraska. I do think this is the week that Nebraska gets their first win. The moronic, idiotic things are happening less and less. Adrian Martinez is getting healthier and healthier. The players are getting more and more comfortable in the system. We've heard the coaching talk about how the Purdue game was a turning week for them practice-wise. They've been practicing better than ever. And I know a lot of that can be coach speak, so I don't like to read a whole lot into that stuff. I like to more look at tangible things, like stats that I'm seeing here. And even just by looking at those things, I mean, Nebraska should win this game if they don't beat themselves. I know Northwestern beat Michigan State. I was actually kind of surprised, so I had to go back and kind of study the film because I was curious how Northwestern won that game. And it was a lot of fool's gold. Northwestern rushed for like 20 yards and beat Michigan State. They had some really great plays that the receivers made and kind of some big plays in the passing game that I don't see them making consistently. So I think that game was a little bit of fool's gold, and you know, sports is never an exact science. Upsets happen, and that's why we play the games. That's why we don't just go by the spread. We actually play the games because you don't know what's going to happen. But I think that win against Michigan State was a little bit of fool's gold for Northwestern. And if Nebraska plays a clean game, they win this game. So my official score prediction is going to be 30-24. Nebraska wins by 6. My prediction last week was dead on the money, actually. I predicted 41-24. Wisconsin wins by 17, and that's exactly what happened. I hit both teams on the nose. Obviously, I'm probably not going to do that again, but 30-24, Nebraska wins by 6 is my official prediction. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Peace.